Wakanda is on fire, with Wakandians in charge, and through the Wakandian lords, they've been empowered by their masters, white libtards, to set the streets on fire, and the creation of chaos through woke actions, which has resulted in the real virus that is infecting us all and is killing many people. Woke actions, which can be seen in Washington, D.C. D.C., which has reached over 200 homicides just this year alone, with a black police chief in charge. Woke actions like in Philadelphia, which has reached 500 plus homicides with a black police chief in charge. 500 homicides, by the way, which was prophesied by the great American prophet Lil Durk, who 6 years ago made a song called 500 Homicides. Thanks, rap. Always a great influence. Now, of course, white supremacy is to blame for this mostly black death. And if you're for some reason doubting it's mostly black death by black hands, then just follow the link and scroll the gun memorial website for Pennsylvania in the city of Philadelphia. And follow the link and scroll the gun memorial website for the District of Columbia. And just search the entire area. There you will see for yourself mostly black death by black hands, which has contributed to the over 200 homicides in D.C. and 500 in Philadelphia. Again, in this year alone. But hey, at least some of the victims and criminals were wearing their mask at the time. Now, speaking of the District of Columbia, we have an idiot who was on this season of Survivor 41, who attends Georgetown University, which is in D.C. And I have to bring this bitch back up because I mentioned her in my previous video. Now, this student, Liana Wallace, made such a fucking obnoxious idiot speech about racism and black death on Survivor right before she became the 5th juror, by the way. And it just showed her indoctrination for dummies education. It just showed it and how pointless and useless it is despite all the money that it costs. It just revealed that she was an educated fool who gets pats on the back by the white libtards she hangs around. I mean, you can even look at the comment section of her Ponderosa video on YouTube and you see a bunch of white libtards in the comment section patting her on the back for her ignorant ass statements with her stupid speech right before she got voted off. You know, she was talking about black death, and as I mentioned before, she made reference to an over 60-year-old death in Emmett Till, which they were still probing into as recent as a day or two ago. Because pay no mind to all the black deaths that are not 60 years old, but just a few weeks old. Like the fatal shooting of that 1-year-old in D.C., where Police Chief Robert J. Conti III, a black man, stated, quote, "more difficult to get the story of what happened to this child," end quote. Because, you know, no snitching and shit. We keep it real. Keep it real niggas and shit over here. So a 1-year-old black baby's death, you can't find the culprit in that situation. But let's ignore that black death and pay attention to black death over 60 years old. But that's what Liana and other bougie and hood rat black assholes like to do. They like to talk about shit from decades ago. and speak against white people all day. Even though it's whites who, these bougie blacks like Liana, it's whites who are most of their friends and their primary dating choices. And I must be specific. When I say they're white friends, I mean they're white liberal friends who get off on their black friends being victims. And their black friends serve them well with their victimhood. Hell, in fact, a CBS Chicago affiliate gave this boule negress a great pat on the head, highlighting in an interview Survivor's all-black alliance. Doesn't that sound familiar to CBS? Just reference Big Brother. But during this interview, Liana stated, quote, "Just wanted us to make top 10. Then we can have World War II," end quote. Now, again, that sounds familiar to another show, where all black alliance occurred. Big Brother 23, the Black Klan Alliance. But, CBS Chicago was celebrating this, spending this time on this stupid, pointless story, spending less time, though, on stories like this 11-year-old Chicago boy whose mother escaped from Chicago to escape all of that, black love and black power in Chicago, Wakanda. She escaped that place with her son only to run into another Wakanda and another Wakandian in a new town who killed her 11-year-old son. This 11-year-old, by the way, was killed by a 12-year-old. So, forgive me for not giving two shits about all black alliances and celebrating symbolic victories while real shit gets ignored. And this literal hunting down of this child's life, it pretty much mirrors what that worthless cunt LeBron James said, talking about, "We're being hunted every day." But, he won't talk about this 11-year-old's death, a black death, to use Liana's words. He won't talk about that situation. He'll just talk about the fan fiction of being hunted, him and his family, who are like the rest of us, despite the fact this nigga lives in a gated community with cameras everywhere, but somehow his house got vandalized with the N-word on it, but he never showed proof. Much like a Jussie Smollett. But anyway, this boy's death is a classic case of actually being hunted. And the ones who are doing the hunting, they aren't running around with MAGA hats, like in Jussie Smollett's case. The lying, gay, half-Jewish black guy who, much like Survivor Liana, likes to manufacture racist events for clout, even if him achieving his clout meant he could have started another race riot. And nothing will happen to him, by the way. Yeah, he was found guilty on 5 or 6 charges, but the dude is connected. He's actually privileged, and so he won't serve the time that he should. The bitch should get 10 years, but, if anything, he'll get, 10 months of community service or something. But again, people like Liana, people like LeBron, they don't care. They don't care. Whether it be Black Death in Chicago, which is at over 1,000 homicides this year. Chicago, another location that has a black police chief, by the way. Or whether it be Black Death in Philly, which is at over 500 homicides this year with a black police chief. Or Black Death in D.C., where Liana survivor attends school. That's over 200 homicides this year with a black police chief. These people don't care about any of that shit because they've been employed by their true slave masters and fetish partners to engage in endless victimhood while ignoring what's really happening. And it's spreading, by the way. Just ask the residents of Beverly Hills and ask The 81-year-old Jacqueline Avant's family, the Black Godfather's wife, just ask her and just ask her family, I should say. Because if you ask them, unfortunately, they will still deny it. Because her killer was a Wakandian who invaded her home and killed her with an AR-15 style weapon. You know, the kind of weapon that Kyle Rittenhouse used to defend himself, that woke Negroes were offended by. But maybe if people were allowed to defend themselves more often instead of worrying about who said what that was racist, more people would be alive and criminals would be less emboldened to commit crimes against people. But according to the woke, what people say that may or may not be racist is far more important than actual black death. Even though the same people they vote for and root for, like Joe Biden, have said plenty of racist shit, they still want you and I to believe that they care about racist shit that gets said. But the fact is, slurs. There are many slurs worse than the N-word, aka nigger, that get said to black people all the time by their white liberal allies. For example, Oregon governor signing a bill suspending math and reading requirements for high school grads to help benefit the state's POCs. That's calling you nigger without calling you nigger, and it's far worse than being called nigger. Because in this bill, you get black people that get mentioned first, followed by Latinos who they don't even refer to as just Latinos. They call them Latinx, a term they hate, but white liberals still enjoy using. Because that's what they do. They put shit on people even though they don't want to accept it. But they still pander to them, so people will still support them anyway. But another example of slurs worse than the N-word, aka nigger, the Chicago police chief who said he wouldn't have arrested Jussie Smollett if he simply apologized. So, despite all of the resources that Jussie or Juicy Smollett wasted, despite all those resources that he wasted, that many people obviously really need, and despite that he was trying to incite another riot, this dumbass black police chief still would have forgiven him if his half Jewish black gay ass simply apologized. Yep. Those are where your votes go, and that's your black representation at work, ladies and gentlemen. And again, over 1,000 homicides under this guy's watch. And last but not least, another example of slurs worse than the N-word, aka nigger. The nation's first supervised drug injection site opens in New York, placed in a mostly black neighborhood, near a school, by the way. Now, that first supervised drug injection site, that's just a fancy way of saying they placed a trap house, crack house, that's government sponsored in Wakanda, near their schools. A place where drug addicts are literally allowed to shoot up with all kinds of drugs, doing all kinds of drugs, and if they overdose, they have meds there to save them. So that's where your money is going. Those tax dollars helping to fuel drug addicts in their habit and place them by your children's school. Now, I found out this story partly due to this black man right here called Cannon Hotep, who complained about it. But just like with most woke black tards like him, he still misses the point, since he goes on to blame all white people for this. And I'm sure this guy is another one of these Wakandians, despite blaming all whites, votes for the same party or prefers the same party which created this government-sponsored trap house, crack house next to schools. But again, people like Liana from Survivor and others won't say anything about it. In fact, these dumb bitches and many dumb bitches like them will ignore this reality of what is causing black death. I mean, again, even with Philly having a black female police chief and DC having a black male police chief and Chicago having a black male police chief and Lightfoot as mayor, I believe she's mayor, even with all that, despite all of this black representation, you know, the type of representation they wanted in Survivor and Big Brother. But despite all of this happening in the real life game of life, despite all that representation, nothing positive has come from it. In fact, things have only gotten worse. Worse in those cities, and I expect it will get worse in these reality game shows. Because more representation based on these victimhood complex individuals or individuals with victimhood complexes, representation based on those types of people will only make things worse, not better.